matin, tout le monde! Wow! Je vous souhaite la bienvenue au Centre de foire de Québec pour cette 14e édition de l'Agile Tour. Mais avant, je veux sentir l'énergie dans cette salle. Amis Agile, est-ce que vous allez bien? Yes! Hey, ça fait du bien de se retrouver pareil, parce qu'on s'est ennuyé, on va se le dire, 2 ans et demi sans se voir, ça n'a pas de bon sens. Puis je pense que dans ces 2 années et demie, vous êtes allé puiser à l'intérieur de vous, dans vos ressources d'agilité pour vos relations, pour vos organisations, pour vous personnellement. Je pense qu'on s'en est quand même bien sorti. Puis juste pour ça, on mérite de s'applaudir très fort. Merci d'être avec nous. Mon nom est Carl Labrie et je suis de la firme Éclosion Animation Professionnelle. Je serai votre facilitateur aujourd'hui. Je ferai des liens entre les différents conférenciers et vous expliquer la procédure de cette journée qui s'annonce inoubliable. Donc, au nom du comité organisateur, je suis très heureux de vous accueillir ici en présentiel sur le parquet du centre de foire. Je salue aussi les 350, 400 personnes qui sont en ligne. Ici, sur le parquet, on est à peu près 750, 800. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous aujourd'hui pour cette 14e édition de l'Agile Tour qui s'inscrit dans une série d'événements sur l'agilité qui se passe partout dans le monde. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est à Québec que ça va se passer! Alors, ça fait déjà 14 ans qu'on entretient cette passion de l'agilité, qu'on tisse des liens au sein de notre super belle et grandissante communauté agile. Alors, on va continuer aujourd'hui de faire ça dans une programmation qui est remplie, nourrissante, enrichissante. Vous allez sortir d'ici avec évidemment de nouvelles idées, une nouvelle attitude, parce qu'à chaque année, ce qu'on fait, après l'événement, on prend des notes, on prend vos commentaires, on essaie d'amener toujours à un autre niveau ce qu'est l'agilité, et c'est ce qu'on va tenter de faire aujourd'hui. Histoire de vous souhaiter maintenant officiellement la bienvenue à cette 14e édition, je demande à la présidente du conseil d'administration d'Agile Québec, Mme Sarah Dubé, de vous souhaiter officiellement la bienvenue.
Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à la 14e édition de l'Agile Tour. Le CA et le comité organisateur de l'Agile Tour, on est très heureux de vous accueillir pour la première fois en personne et à distance. Les dernières années, comme vous le savez, ont été très mouvementées. Toutes les industries ont été touchées, puis malheureusement, on n'a pas fait exception. On a travaillé toute l'année pour vous offrir un événement qui est à la hauteur de vos attentes. L'Agile Tour de Québec n'aurait pas été possible, en fait, sans l'appui du conseil d'administration et du comité organisateur qui a été à mes côtés toute l'année. Je veux aussi en profiter, prendre un moment pour saluer nos Keynote qui sont là aujourd'hui, Dave West, qui est arrivé de Boston, et Jean-Pierre Lambert, tout droit de France. Je veux aussi souligner que la participation de Dave West se fait de façon gracieuse. Il a décidé d'offrir son cachet à un organisme de charité. Je pense qu'on peut l'applaudir. Je veux aussi en profiter pour remercier du fond du cœur tous les bénévoles qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui. En fait, un événement comme celui-là ne serait pas possible sans leur participation. L'Agile Tour, c'est l'occasion d'échanger, d'apprendre et de faire rayonner notre belle communauté. C'est aussi l'occasion d'approfondir nos connaissances avec la programmation la plus diversifiée, que vous soyez débutant ou expérimenté. L'Agile Tour, ça s'inscrit dans la mission d'Agile Québec, de promouvoir l'agilité à Québec, de développer une meilleure compréhension des différentes approches agiles, de favoriser, de soutenir les échanges d'idées, les connaissances et les expériences des membres de la communauté. L'Agile Tour de Québec contribue aussi à suivre et à discuter des meilleures pratiques agiles. Finalement, l'organisation d'un événement comme celui de l'Agile Tour de Québec ne serait pas possible sans nos précieux partenaires. Je passe donc la parole à David-Olivier Blouin, responsable des partenariats 2022.
Merci, Sarah. Donc, au niveau de nos partenaires, vous allez les voir un petit peu partout pendant l'événement. Il y en a qui sont sur votre lanières, il y en a qui vont être sur les écrans, il y en a qui vont être un petit peu partout. Donc, évidemment, on veut prendre le temps de les remercier. Si on commence avec la catégorie Fou d'agilité, nous avons cette année Cofomo et CGI. Dans la catégorie Enthousiaste, nous avons Lévio. La catégorie Supporters, nous avons Zenica, GFT, Logisphère, Systematics, Nmedia. Et dans la catégorie Découverte, nous avons Kanban Québec, Laurentia, Pacemaker et RK Agiliste. Donc, une bonne main d'applaudissements pour nos partenaires.
Merci beaucoup, Sarah. Merci beaucoup, David. Alors, pour cette journée, pour répondre à vos questions à propos de l'horaire ou des salles, vous vous adressez à notre équipe de bénévoles. Ils sont facilement identifiables. Nos bénévoles portent un chandail bleu pâle et les membres du comité organisateur un chandail bleu foncé. Ils vont répondre aujourd'hui à toutes vos questions. On vous invite évidemment à partager votre expérience agile sur nos réseaux sociaux aujourd'hui via Twitter, @AgileQuébec, #ATCQ22 et sur Facebook, Agile Québec. Maintenant, l'aperçu de la journée, la programmation du jour est disponible, vous le savez, dans l'application SwapCard, autant pour les gens dans la salle que pour les gens qui sont en ligne avec nous aujourd'hui. Ce midi, on va se retrouver dans cette même salle pour le dîner. Vous avez un coupon bleu pour le dîner qui sera échangeable contre une boîte à lunch et un breuvage. Et la journée va se terminer dans la convivialité où vous allez pouvoir réseauter dans un cocktail 5 à 7, parler aux conférenciers qui vont s'adresser à vous aujourd'hui. Et vous allez pouvoir aussi échanger avec vos nouveaux amis agiles que vous allez rencontrer tout au cours de cette journée. Pour la signalisation, pour vous orienter au fil de cette journée, référez-vous aux écrans qui sont placés devant les salles d'ateliers et de conférences qui vous indiquent les différents éléments à venir au programme. C'est maintenant l'heure de la toute première Keynote. Ce matin, nous avons aujourd'hui le plaisir d'accueillir pour démarrer cette journée de feu en force le CEO et le Product Owner de Scrum.org. Aux côtés de Ken Schwaber et de l'équipe de Scrum.org, Dave West travaille au quotidien à réaliser la vision et la mission de Scrum, c'est-à-dire améliorer les métiers du développement logiciel. Dans cette keynote d'ouverture, Dave va nous ouvrir une fenêtre sur le futur de l'agilité. Quelles sont les leçons que nous ont apprises 27 années de Scrum? Quelle évolution nous apportera l'avenir? Et quelles seront les fondations du monde du travail de demain? Les réponses à toutes ces questions dans cette keynote qui sera 100% anglophone, puisque Dave arrive tout droit du Massachusetts. Donc, conférencier reconnu, il est aussi l'auteur de nombreux articles de recherche ainsi que 2 livres, mais surtout, il est notre premier invité aujourd'hui pour démarrer cette 14e édition de l'Agile Tour en direct de Québec. Sans plus attendre, faites un maximum de bruit. Please make some noise pour M. Dave West.
Bonjour, bonjour Quebec. That's it, that's my French done, sorry. I had a very scary French teacher in England called Mrs. McGregor, and I'm afraid had a real impact on my ability to speak French, so pardon for my lack of French. So this is going to be in English, an even worse kind of English. It's sort of half American and half English. As my grandma says, I've gone mid-Atlantic, so I apologize for that. So my name's Dave, and I'm going to be talking to you for the next hour or so on really what the future of agility is, what we're seeing, what the changes that we're seeing in the world are. And I've got a really, really lucky job, because what I do for a living is I run Scrum.org, but I potter around the world, virtually actually over the last 3 years, now starting to get in person again, talking to organizations that are doing Agile, talking to people that are doing Agile. So hopefully I can share some of those stories and some of those anecdotes as we deal with these slides. So, my name's Dave. I run an organization called Scrum.org. When I say run, that sounds like I'm very important. I serve an organization called Scrum.org. Basically, I'm the person that gets the coffees in and the like. We're about 360 people, 370 trainers around the world delivering Scrum training. Train about 8,000, between 5,000 and 8,000 people a month. We certify about 20,000 people a month, 20-something thousand people a month all over the world. And what we've seen during COVID, actually, is a massive rise in online people coming to the website. We have about 1.3 million people to the website every month, which is really, really scary. And also, I think illustrative of all of you in here, the fact that Agile has become and Scrum have become the fundamental way in which people work today, which is really, really exciting. So if this was 2019, and I was doing a keynote in 2019, I'd get up on stage, probably dressed very similarly, and I'd bounce around a bit, and I'd talk about why we're at this stage, why we need agility. I'd talk about the fact that when Amazon said it was getting into the prescription drug business, the share price of CVS and Walgreens, the big prescription companies, pharmacies in the US, share price dropped. It halved overnight. I talk about how GE no longer is the powerhouse that it once was. I talk about the fact that Sears is destroying the shopping malls in America that's disappearing. I talk about change. But I really don't need to do that now. We live in very interesting times. We've seen over the last 2 to 3 years fundamental, massive changes in the world that we live in. Whether we're looking at the Russia invasion of Ukraine, whether we're talking about Brexit, that they're towing the island away from Europe as we speak, whether we're talking about a global recession, whether we're talking about a virus that just won't go away, or maybe we're talking about monkeypox now, right? The fact that we're living in this world that's in this moment of change, and we forget to even mention climate change. The fact that, a billion people will not have access to water in the next 12 to 15 years. We're living in very interesting times. And, some people like boy bands like BTS. Some people, are really into NASCAR or American football. I like economists. And the economist that I'm particularly into is a lady called Khalida Perez. Khalida Perez is an economist that writes about technology ages. And the thing that's so interesting about technology ages is that they tend to be the catalyst for fundamental society change, which is really, really interesting. Now, she's an economist, so she writes, kind of economist books, but her blogs and her videos are awesome, so I'd recommend them. She wrote this book, and it inspired a Canadian to write the start of his book, Mick Curson. Some of you have met, Project to Product. He also talks about Carlita's work. And she believes, and I also believe, that we're in the deployment phase of the digital age. Now, the last time that happened was about 1940 with the deployment age of the oil and mass production age. Now, we all remember what was happening in 1940. I wasn't around at the time, even though I looked like I should have been. But there was significant upheaval in the world. And she believes that ultimately we're at this moment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you sit here as Agile practitioners in organizations that were spawned in the oil and mass production age, there's not a surprise that you're living with a massive amount of friction. We're moving out of one age, an age that was predominantly focused on the ideas of Ford and the ideas of the mass production, sort of like breaking down work into small chunks, Taylorism and the like. We're moving out of that age into something new. We call it digital because, that sort of embodies this microchip that was developed in 1971 just outside San Francisco. We're at that age. There's no surprise that you're in this sort of friction point. It's no surprise that you go to meetings and maybe it's not a surprise that we're at that point, really, because we're sort of navigating away from an age where change was regulated and managed, where it was all very much at the front, at the start of the process, to something where change happens continuously. March the 13th, 2020, was the last time I was in the office in Burlington before the pandemic. On my left to my lovely little office, that's the office that I work in is the place the second Scrum project ever happened. That's pretty exciting. I wanted to put a plaque on the wall, but the building people said, what, the rugby thing? So we didn't manage to do it, unfortunately. So I'm sitting there in the office, March the 13th, 2020, and I have this really nice vision of the future of Scrum.org on my board to the left of me. I've written it out, it's just awesome, it's really good, and the backlogs are loaded, and everybody's working, and we've got alignment, and we're all excited. I've hired a few people, I'm super buzzing. In fact, one of the people I'd hired joined me that week in the Burlington office. March the 13th was the last time I was in the office. That product roadmap, that vision, never got executed. Because on the Monday, we went into mass lockdown and we had 360 trainers who couldn't teach in person. So everything that we were focused on changed. We focused on helping these trainers, their livelihoods, helping them navigate to online. We worked in very rapid 1 or 2 week sprints, very much focused on delivering value to customers. We actually executed those sprints, had classes running with materials that were developed in those sprints at the same time. The community came together in a way that I'd never seen before. Slack was hotter than a hot thing being hot. It was literally, people were like, hey, I look at this mural. Hey, I've checked in this new version of an exercise into GitHub. Does it work? And this is people all around the world as we navigated to online training. The next few months were pretty rocky, but slowly we started to do as much online training as we did in person. And now it's about 70-30, 60-40, I think. A lot of in-person training is going on in Europe, but the rest of the world seems to be definitely very online. So do you reckon I'll ever be able to write a roadmap in the way that I wrote it before? No, I've realized that investment of time, those 3 months of debate and discussion, stakeholder meetings, is a bit of a waste of time. Instead, I clearly articulate a series of product goals. I have a broad strategy and a mission, and I incrementally work towards that 1 sprint at a time. And the whole cadence of our organization is about that. So we review all of the different teams, and after their sprint reviews, make sure we're moving all together in an overall nexus. But the bottom line is that we live in this sort of world. And the reality is most organizations are in this situation too. And that's what makes it so hard. What's interesting about COVID, and this is a relatively small sample, McKinsey did a study of the organizations they were working with to see if agility was better, where the agile teams were more able to cope with COVID than the non-agile teams. And the results were pretty consistent. The organizations that were very much along this agile transformation, this agile working model or operating model, as McKinsey calls it, those organizations were more able to adapt. In fact, I was talking to one of their senior partners. He said they didn't even notice COVID. I mean, obviously they noticed it, but the teams just instantly slotted into working at home. They instantly started adopting, different working practices, using things like Mural. They had retrospectives, enabled them to do that. The one thing that changed, he said, who went to the sprint reviews changed for them. They found that a lot of senior people were now attending more sprint reviews, and a lot of middle managers were less involved. In fact, there was a part of this study that they actually ended up not talking about much, which sort of highlighted the fact that the middle managers in these organizations were really not as useful or as valuable as you would imagine. I think that's ultimately because they weren't allowed to be rather than actually anything else. But as they went to this sort of crisis mode, what they found was the teams were very much self-sustaining, and leaders, executives, were embedding themselves in those teams for the sprint reviews to provide clear, direction and get an idea of what was going on, which was really, really interesting. So ultimately, what we saw was that COVID was really an accelerator to this move to the digital age. Now, at the highest level, at the macro level, as we move from the age of mass production and oil to this age of digital, this post-industrial age, what are the big things that are going to be really jumping out in front of us? And I think I sort of highlighted some of the things that I see in most organizations. Short-term planning investment horizons, short-termism. Now, that's also, though, it's quite interesting. There's this really interesting sort of contradiction that I see. Long-term vision and strategy at the highest level, but very much the planning of the work and the tactics, very much 1 month, 3 month, even 2-week cycles of planning. So smaller sort of bets, making much more small bets. The other thing that's really interesting, and this is what most organizations are really wrestling with, a greater alignment around customers and product. When we say customer, obviously we mean the people that gain value out of the things that we're delivering. When we say product, we mean the partitioned capability that has that's invested in, it has some value and some sort of cost to the organization. So those trying to realign from systems and applications and departments and structures like that into, and projects, which is even worse kind of in this way, to this more customer-centric aligned model. Now there's actually an interesting question around this alignment. Short-lived and long-lived teams. And actually what we're seeing from all the organizations I visit is that there's a sort of mix. If you go to Tesla, they use very much an open space, very short-lived teams, very focused on the outcomes. I sometimes debate whether the reason why their teams are short-lived is because the members of those teams don't live longer than 2 sprints anyway. They wear them out, they work them hard, which is admirable. So they are very short-lived teams. Whereas opposed to a lot of organizations now are trying to build these very much more long-lived, customer-oriented teams or product-oriented teams. And there seems to be no true single model around that, whether it's an open space model or more of a traditional sort of agile team model. Efficiency versus abundance. This is an interesting thing, but you wouldn't think that during COVID, where we were trapped in our houses having to learn to be teachers, and having to spend massive amounts of time with our significant others and running out of Netflix shows to watch, that we would have this abundance mindset. But ultimately, what we're seeing is that we're moving away from this efficiency, scarcity mindset into something slightly different. How many times have you been to a meeting with 10 people to debate spending $2,000 on sending somebody to a conference? And you look around the room and you realize you've spent more than $2,000 on the meeting, so it's a bit silly to do it. And really that is at the sort of heart of the change that we're seeing. Organizations inherently are built today for not making mistakes, not making things successful, not winning, just not losing. Losing is more important, not to lose is more important than to win. Now we need to flip that switch and really move to a model that's more around winning, that's more around innovation, that's more around delivering value. We live in a world where we can do amazing things. We built a brand new vaccine in 3 months. Now, my office, not that I was there at the time, actually overlooks the Moderna offices where they designed the new vaccine. And it's just incredible. They used Scrum. They used an Agile approach for modeling that, which is really, really super amazing. And they had this abundance mindset. They knew they had a problem, they had the right people, and they just got on with it and did it. Cross-functional teams, self-organization, rise of the creator. The organizations of the future are not focused on specialist departments. They're not focused on process control. They're not focused on the management being king. The last age ultimately, in the 50s, you know, and America at the moment is sort of trying to go back to the 50s, but we'll ignore that for a second. But the 50s was the age of the manager, right? That was what you got your Cadillac, you lived in your suburb, and we've all seen Mad Men, right? It's got these, you know, you drank whiskey at 10 a.m. if you're a manager. Or was that a senior manager? I can't remember the difference. Is it beer for the managers? I don't know. But you know, management was king. That is not the case now. Creators are king. My job it was really disappointing, you know, when I became a CEO, my mum was like, oh, you're doing very well. She goes, what do you do? I say, I spend my entire time helping others. She goes, no, that's not what a CEO does. You should be carried around in one of those Roman things. I was like, no, that's just as I became a CEO, the world flipped, and my job is just to sign checks and to help people. That's pretty much my role. And that's because the creators on my teams are more important than me, a lot more important to me. So my job is to help them be successful. Sometimes that means money. Sometimes that means love. Sometimes that means asking questions. Sometimes that means getting out of their way, which is incredibly hard, and not having an opinion on something, which is also almost impossible. But that's my role. So how do we navigate to this world, move from this factory to this very different, organic, smaller probably, more nimble, more aligned to customers, more risky in some ways, organization? I don't know, but what I'm seeing are these things. We're seeing, number one, the realignment of organizations to products. So, and yes, homage to the Agile Manifesto here, sorry. Alignment to value-based products over projects and applications. So what we're seeing, projects and applications aren't going away, but the way we deliver the majority of our value to our customers is through these value-based, customer-centric product teams. Self-managed teams over process and management. So we are empowering, enabling, creating, nurturing these amazing teams of human beings focused on a proper product goal to deliver value. We're decoupling skill management from work management. Obviously, we all talk about the Spotify model, which Spotify might not be really doing. We all talk about that. But ultimately, not the model, tribes, chapters, guilds, squads, but the idea that's behind it. The idea that you basically build cross-functional teams aligned to customers. They call them squads and tribes, right? You then support them with an organization that actually has merit, has teeth, and actually can help them get better. And we'll talk more about this in a moment, because I think this is really, really important. It's something that a lot of organizations are just starting to play with. And then outcomes, funding products and outcomes, reducing the complexity of our planning cycles. Wouldn't that be amazing? So we don't spend 6 months planning in the next year. We can actually focus on outcomes and fund our products based on where they are in terms of their evolution. Are they early in their life or are they late in their life? And the value they deliver to the organization. And we don't plan work. We do at the team level, but we don't at the macro level. So product. Aligning customers to outcomes, aligning them to that mission. Now, what's really interesting about this is that there's nothing special about Agile. But everybody's like, well, you know, how do those teams succeed? The biggest reason why Agile teams succeed, usually, is the alignment to their customers and the friction around delivering to them. If you can reduce the friction of delivery whilst ensuring that there's a clear line of sight to the customer and the outcomes that you achieve, magic happens. We prove it over and over again when that happens. The other thing that's very interesting is how you fund that. We fund the product, fund the outcomes, don't fund the work, and then measure them by the outcomes they achieve, not the work that they do. Learning about work is valuable. Don't get me wrong. Understanding things like flow, understanding WIP, understanding queues, understanding cycle time, all those flow metrics are incredibly valuable, but they're not necessary in terms of the importance and the value of the actual thing you're delivering. So, first thing that we see, and the first major change that most organizations are wrestling with, is this alignment to product and to customer. The next one is the teams. So we've now got that alignment. So we start building teams that deliver against these customer value streams. Now, there's lots of things that pull you away from this. Legacy systems, department structures, incentives, skills, etc. There's a large financial institution in Boston that was the second company ever to do Scrum. Ken visited them, and he was, set up their first Scrum implementation, and they were incredibly successful. They delivered their first online sort of like brokerage trading system that you could go as a customer and, select your stock. This was in the early 90s. Mid-90s. And they wrestled with doing Scrum at scale over and over again. And the fundamental reason why they weren't successful was around incentives. Their teams were made up of individuals. Those individuals, they're working in finance, they had a 25-30% of their salary bonus that was tied to KPIs. Those KPIs were determined by their departmental managers. Those departmental managers at the start of the cycle plan those KPIs with these people, and then they had to demonstrate how they delivered against these KPIs to ensure the percentage of their bonus, which was, $50,000, $60,000, so it's a lot of money. So guess what? That pulled them away from their teams and from the focus, the sprint goal, the product goal that they were working to. And it was really bizarre when they did an audit, an evaluation of Scrum in their organizations. They found that January to June, the Scrum teams were working really effectively. Then June, July, and they're in finance, they're all on the Cape or, on the beach or something. Then August, September, and then they started to break. And then October and November, they were delivering all sorts. They weren't really delivering at all. It was all about incentives. So incentives can fundamentally pull the rug from your Agile team, so you have to be very wary of them. Now, a lot of organizations are like, well, hang on a minute, we've got legacy systems, we can't align to the customer. Yeah, compromise might be necessary, but you shouldn't start with that in mind. There's amazing solutions like open source, for managing your legacy systems. There's mechanisms around service-oriented architectures for if you're going to go into the technology side. There's all sorts of ways of effectively managing the compromises or the challenges, but you shouldn't start in that manner. Skills-based community, this is super, super important. Super important. And something that organizations are not necessarily great at, I'll be totally honest. But seeing a group of this many people in one room in a community of this size, I think that maybe you'll be all right. The idea isn't that you get promoted for your contribution to the work. You get promoted for your contribution to your people around you. So my gran, who's a rock star, was brought up my grandparents in a council house just outside Leicester. And when I used to come home from school, I was a cool kid. I was basing my life on Rick Astley and Morrissey and stuff. So I'd come home, and my gran would always say to me, she'd always say, not, how did you do? She'd say, who have you helped? I was like, Gran, I haven't helped anybody. I'm too cool for that. She'd go, well, if you don't help somebody, then you won't get help when you need it. And she really did instill that in me. And I think that modern organizations need to really take a leaf out of that book. We need to start thinking more actively, not what did we do, what skills have we got, how good are we? This is, by the way, this is against the rules in America. You get thrown out. I'd actually lose my passport if I taught this way, but just so don't mention it. But it's really, who did you help? How did you help somebody get better? So imagine if you worked in an organization where 4 days a week you were very focused on delivering value to your products, to your Scrum team, and then 1 day a week your job was to help others in other teams. Imagine if you were incentivized in a model that actually you get promoted not by what did you contribute to your Scrum team and to your product, but what you helped, how you helped others. Just think how much more effective your organization would be. Just think how much more amazing ideas would be shared. Just think how much more coffee would be drank. Just think how many amazing relationships that you would create, because you have a reason to have this work relationship. Wouldn't it be amazing? I think that's how you scale ideas. I think that's how you scale skills. And if you can instill these kinds of organizational constructs into your company, you can start really developing people. I think this is super, super important. Then funding. Funding's kind of interesting. This is a really bad diagram, because I'm not very good at diagrams, it turns out, around how funding sort of works at the highest level. So I go into a lot of organizations that have massive PMOs that are spending their entire time from September, October timeframe planning the next year. I see estimates going up and down the chain. I see priority lists, etc. I think it's all a bit of a waste of time. Now, there we go. So somebody either woke up or they thought I agreed with me. Thank you. I think that ultimately, if you can just work out what your products and services are, determine the value of that, determine the investment that you want to make in those products and services, then fund the teams based on that. If it's a huge, important part of your business, then you need to fund it more than a smaller part of your business, unless there's a strategic reason to invest in that side. And then allow the teams and the product owners and the product managers to effectively work out what the most important things are. Now, you will have things that overlay, that cross-cut across your products. They will be products. Maybe there's things about GDPR or compliance or security, etc. Those things need to be factored in, but ultimately, and this is the thing that's crazy, it is ultimately the choice of that product whether they adopt this. And there might be a strategic reason why it's a lot more important on their priority list. But you need to fund products, and then fund the teams, and then let them determine the work, and allow the teams to pull the work. Some of you may have watched the Joe Justice Agile at Tesla talk. Really, really interesting. Joe Justice is a character, that's for sure. What they do is they utilize an open space model where you literally, lead engineers, pick work from a AI-ordered backlog. I don't know how much AI is involved, but AI-ordered backlog, supposedly, which is being informed by all of the cars in the world running and the feedback from that, all of the machines in the factory running and the feedback, and the human beings on that. They feature in this backlog, and then they pick the work, pull a team together, and work on that thing. Now, they've got some definitely interesting challenges, but one thing that they do really well is they get stuff done. You can't argue with that. They have issues around longevity. Sometimes things disappear because it's not consistent teaming, and they don't document absolutely anything, which is a little bit of a concern sometimes, but they get stuff done. They work in a really interesting way. They're sort of like this on steroids. So when you sort of take this to the sort of next level and start thinking about this at a sort of macro level, you start thinking about lean startup, design thinking, and agile delivery all kind of merging together. So if we're funding these product teams, if we're aligning them to customers, if we're building a skills-based community to enable them, what we see is the need for design thinking at the team level, some sort of business perspective, a modern business perspective, which the nearest one that I can come up with is lean startup, that idea of this business model canvas, this idea of customer discovery, validation, creation, and building, and then this sort of agile delivery model, all happening at the teams that are aligned to customers. Now, obviously, your particular product may be in a customer building model. It might not be in a customer creation stage. And you might say, well, hang on a minute, Dave. I work for the government. We don't do customer creation and customer building. Our citizens are just there, right? But actually using the products, learning about their usage model, actually creating an engagement with them, maybe you're not. Depending on the systems you're at, maybe you're always in the building phase. But ultimately, what we are doing is we're navigating the backlog, the things that we need to do through this life cycle incrementally. So it ultimately means that we as Agile practitioners can't just focus on things like Scrum. We have to also understand stuff like from Eric Ries and Stephen Blank around Lean Startup and different ways of thinking about the business. We need to obviously pull the Lean UX ideas and the D-School and the work that's happening in Palo Alto and the like, in design thinking. We need to think of those different things. We also need to start thinking around how we measure to outcomes. This is an approach that we use at Scrum.org. I don't think it's the only approach, for sure, so use what makes sense. But when we think about the outcomes we're managing to, we tend to focus on 4 main blocks. And they tend to be the 2 of them tend to be focused on market value, and the other 2 tend to be focused on organizational capability. Let's start at the bottom first. So most organizations, ultimately, the success of their agile capability is dependent on one very crucial factor, their ability to deliver. We understand that agility is about empiricism, right? That it's about getting those feedback loops working very effectively. If we can't deliver, we can't be agile. So time to market, that delivery model, this idea of T2M, that time to market measure, is super important. Now, depending on the situation you're in, you cut the suit to suit the cloth, right? You know, is it from idea to implementation, or is it somewhere along that line? Is it really implementation or not? I would argue that it's about that learning. So unless you can deliver effectively and get that feedback, that learning feedback, you're never going to be properly agile. So time to market. The other thing, though, is what are you delivering to market? Is it just maintenance? Is it just compliance? Or is it really valuable stuff? So how much of that is your ability to innovate? What percentage of your backlog is actually value-driven, customer-driven, new features, new capabilities, etc.? And how much of your backlog is, oh gosh, compliance, upgrades, blah, 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 architecture, moving to SOA again, or whatever we're doing. So those 2 things are organizational capability. Above that is market value. Technically more valuable, but unless you have that organizational capability, you're not going to be able to deliver against the market value. And that's 2 things. Current value, what are we delivering now in terms of the value? And it might be, if you've got a commercial product, dollars. It might be customers. If you're maybe working for the government, it's citizens, and how many citizens are using the system, how many new driving licenses are being issued online, or whatever the thing is that you're doing. And then how many could? So I've got a really guilty secret to share with you all. So when I did this with Scrum.org, I was, we were on a whiteboard. We were just, Ken was in the room, and we were talking about what do we measure, and we're looking at, 1.3 million. I was feeling really, really cocky. We have 1.3 million people come to our website every month. That's like Taylor Swift numbers. I was like, yeah, that's awesome, right? I'm pretty cool. And Ken said, well, so Dave, and Ken's very annoying like this. He goes, Dave, how many knowledge workers are in the world? I went, well, he said, let's just Google it. was like, okay. So Gartner believe that there's 1 billion, which I think is a bit crazy. McKinsey, a lot more realistic, says about 700 million knowledge workers. I was like, 700 million. He goes, so what percentage are coming to our website every month? I was like, oh, well, that can take the wind out of your sails, can't it? What was that unrealized value for our web? Well, we're sort of like 1/700th of what it could be. Now, realistically, many of them don't speak English, and our website is predominantly English. We do have some French and some Spanish, and many of them are Chinese. So that's sort of, so if you take so of course I instantly then went into damage limitation mode with Ken, trying to explain to him why it can't be 700 million. But it was a moment of realization that there's a massive amount of unrealized value at scrum.org. And it was kind of a little bit depressing, but luckily they've legalized cannabis in Massachusetts, so I went home and I was fine after that. Thank you. It's great, by the way. Sorry. It is. It really has made COVID a lot easier on many levels. Anyway, so timing is everything, I think. So ultimately, if I'm a product owner, what do I measure on? I measure on value. Now, to deliver on value, I need to have an organizational capability in place to effectively allow me to deliver. So maybe, as a Scrum team, we need to start thinking about measures like these things. Maybe we should start structuring our OKRs, our objectives, around these things. Maybe this is a way of framing OKRs to make them a little bit more focused on outcomes and less about work. So the future. We're living in this world, this massive moment where we're moving from the digital age, moving from the age of oil and mass production into the digital age. You're living at the friction point at that moment. And what we're seeing is these trends are starting to emerge. These trends around skills rather than work-based organizations, alignment to products and outcomes and customers, this idea of measuring to those outcomes and building organizations that basically serve that. So this sounds great, but what about all this stuff? The reality is we have existing projects, existing customers, legacy systems, skill shortages, budgets, planning processes, personnel reviews, my God, personnel reviews, objectives. You know, if we live in Germany, we can't fire anybody. It's impossible. It's against the law there. If we live in France, we have the 6 months off in the middle of the year. You know, if we live in England, we're always drunk. You know, there's all these constraints, not really massive, but there's all these constraints lounging down on us. So what do we do? And of course, we promised loads of stuff to the customer 3 years ago, and we can only use the COVID card so many times. Sorry, we're late, COVID. That's what we do to avoid going to parties we don't like to go to now, right? Got COVID. Really? Again? Yeah, definitely. It's horrible this time. Okay, so here's some strategies that I recommend. Cut the suit to suit the cloth. I see too many Agile coaches looking more and more depressed. Because, you know, what's that saying? Focus on the things that you can change and understand the ones that you can't. You know, that's the sort of route to happiness, right? Cut the suit to suit the cloth, which is an expression my gran used to use all the time, right? It is possible that you haven't got the ability to fundamentally transform your organization, to become customer-centric, to align everything, to build skills-based organizations. However, you do have some scope. And let's define what we can deliver in that scope. Maybe what we mean by done isn't done with the customer. That's a bit depressing, but maybe it's somewhere along the pipeline, along the delivery, the release train. Maybe we can only focus on 4 teams and not everybody building that skill-based. Maybe we have to be informal about mentorship. Cut the suit to suit the cloth. But still persist, still deliver, still get some wins. Focus on those wins and measure the success of those wins. Data, data, data. If you can get some data, the leadership love that. So we recently were working with a large consumer packaged goods. Actually, it's on the website, I can probably say. The new razor from Gillette, you know, the best a man can get or whatever, that razor was built using Scrum. And they have demonstrated how much faster, this is the fastest delivered razor in the history of Gillette. It's a 100-year-old company. How cool is that? In fact, so cool, they had Super Bowl ads. Scrum razor on the Super Bowl. It was awesome. They measured it. The head of R&D there was really interested in cycle times. He put in a lot of flow metrics to demonstrate the value. And he took it to the P&G board, to really the top geezers, and said, this is success. And because of that, they're now funding different ways of working throughout P&G. Successful razor driving a massive change to the organization. Slow change, but a change nonetheless. The other thing is building space. How many people, when you look at your schedule, it literally looks like one of those like impressionist, cubist artworks. You fire up Google Calendar, and there's meetings overlaid with meetings, overlaid with meetings. You know, all different colors, because of course you're really into that stuff. You're meant to be in 4 places at any one time. You're just running from one meeting to another. Then you've got to pick your kids up, take them to hockey. There we are. That was a Canadian thing. You've got to take them to hockey. I don't take my children to hockey. But we go to swim, which is, I think, warmer, slightly warmer, which I recommend, by the way. It's my experience of going to ice rinks is it's always a little chilly. And then you have to come home, you have to cook dinner, then you have to do homework, then your kids have to do homework. No, then you've got to watch your half an hour of Netflix, because otherwise you will, have withdrawal symptoms. Then you've got to start again. It's just like this massive cycle of continuous work. You don't have any time to think. The reason why we have a retrospective in Scrum isn't because I don't think you're always thinking about improvement. And by the way, it wasn't my idea, but I'll just take credit for there for a second. It's because we make space, because you can't always be sprinting, even though technically it's in a sprint, but you know what I mean. You can't always be in a meeting, going to your next meeting. Make time to learn, and then make time to help others. If you can do one thing in the next 6 weeks, find somebody to help and help them. Not only is it rewarding for you as a human being, if I was the Dalai Lama, I'd talk a little bit about spiritual karma and transcendental stuff, but I'm not. I think that it's good for you, but it's also incredibly good for other people. I think if we did more of this, the world would be a better place. Oh, that was very Canadian, wasn't it? Thank you. Toronto is here. If somebody goes a boot, then I'll know this is my Canadian translation software is finally working. Helping others is key. Take a leaf out of my grand's book. Not what did you do today, who did you help? It can change everything. I think that's a key part of agility. At a macro level, please don't adopt Agile in a waterfall manner. Now, by the way, if you're providing services to organizations, get them to write a statement of work that says that it's going to be a waterfall project, definitely. I mean, you want those big SOWs, you want the scaled Agile framework template thrown in there, but once you've got the funding, then concentrate on incremental process improvement. Concentrate on slowly adopting this using dare I say, Scrum or some other mechanism, Kanban. I'd prefer to use Scrum, but I don't mind, to actually effectively, incrementally build this change. Create that change team, create that backlog, find that product owner for the Agile transformation, build those KPIs, incrementally make progress against it. That's how you build change into your organization. And it doesn't finish, really. The team might change, the backlog certainly changes, the product goal might change, I hope it does. Certainly the sprint goals change. Obviously, you may not meet daily, you may meet a little bit different cadence. The length of the sprints probably will be a month, maybe 2 weeks. Those things might change. But ultimately, you incrementally move towards delivering value. And it's not about Scrum, and it's not even about Agile. It's about the impact that Scrum and Agile have on your organization. Those 4 metrics of, sort of like ultimately time to value, how much innovation are you doing, what's the current value and what's the potential value, and seeing those change is what it's all about. At the end of the day, Scrum and agility is not that complicated. Empiricism, empowered self-managed teams, and a focus on continuous improvement. To do it effectively, though, requires you to make some fundamental changes in the way that you turn up. It's around values. It's around alignment to customers. It's around discipline. Definition of done, making sure the daily happens at the same time, making sure the sprint review is focused in the same way, making sure that you're actually updating the board as you move through it, taking those metrics as you go. And it's about learning, support, and community. To do that effectively, I would argue that you need to have in place measures that are all about the outcomes, all about the alignment to the success that really has an impact on your organization. Just imagine if you could reduce cycle times in half, what impact that would have if you're working in the government, to your citizens, if you're working for a large organization, to your shareholders, and to more importantly, your customers' employees. What happens if your amount of innovation per sprint went from 2 things to 4 things? What happens if you manage to start incrementally knocking off that 700 million knowledge workers that I'm apparently going to get my website to focus on? Ideas on a postcard, please. What happens if I just increase that or reduce that by 2% that I'm missing? And my current value increases in response to that. Just think of the sort of world that we live in. But you're all smart people. Don't be dogmatic. I must admit that I'm on Twitter and other social media platforms, and I watch the arguments and the discussions where people are lambasting each other for the words, for their support of a discipline, etc. I find dogma really, really challenging and gets in the way of empiricism, gets in the way of us effectively delivering value. Be humble, be kind. I don't know everything. I'm sure you all don't either. Every day is an opportunity to bring curiosity, to bring kindness, to help others. Every day is that moment. Don't leave your brain at home. That experience that you gathered from the 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of whatever experience, bring it. But don't be constrained by it. Use it as an opportunity. Question it. Curiosity is the most important virtue with kindness. Those 2 things are super valuable. That wasn't, I thought there was another slide. Let's carry on this conversation. We're at this really interesting moment as these 2 ages, these 2 friction points between these 2 ages actually happen. We have an opportunity of doing amazing things. We have the ability to change the world. I drove up here from Boston because of a flight problem, but when I say I drove, my car did most of the driving. Isn't that amazing? It's just absolutely incredible and only almost killed me twice. Now that is a successful delivery in my book. So we can change the world, but we can only do it if we work together and help each other. So thank you for your attention. Have a fantastic show. It's awesome. I'd also like to thank the organizers. This is one of the most professional shows I've been involved with, so merci beaucoup to the organizers. Thank you for that. And do we have some time for questions? Sorry, I probably waffled on, haven't I? Is there somebody in the audience with mics? Have we got like 5 minutes for questions? 5 minutes for questions? Have we got any questions? Have we got anybody managing the mics? Is this going to be one of those awkward moments, like that date when you come in and... Yeah. It reminds me, well, I remember I did online dating once, and I went to the restaurant where I was meant to be meeting this lady that I'd been conversing with, and there's this old lady came and started talking to me, and I thought I obviously know her from work or something. And she chatted, and we were chatting, and she goes, "Do you want to sit down?" I said, "No, I'm waiting for somebody." And she said, "Yeah, me." I was like, oh. One of those awkward moments we just navigated. She turned out to be lovely, and she's now a godmother of one of my children. No, that's actually not true. She could be. Have we got any questions from the audience? Have we got some mics for the audience? Maybe not. Lots of people looking like they're running. How about online? Are there any questions online? We have one question online. Oh. I can't see. There's a question down here? Can't hear you. Sorry. We should have tested this first, shouldn't we? And said, what are we going to do around questions? We have microphones somewhere. A question? Oh, that microphone apparently isn't working. You see, this is the reason why you need to do testing. This is...
Hi. Hello.
Bonjour.
Morning. Since we're in Quebec City, you should assume there's a good proportion of the room that works in the public service. I would like to know if, in your experience, you can point out to the best public service or government that gets agile, that gets the idea, that's good with procurement. We deal with big project, so it's hard to get everybody in the government to be agile and to make it work in the public sector. So who's the best, in your opinion?
Okay, so the question is public sector, who's the best? And he mentioned the P word, procurement. From my experience, I actually think that most government organizations are actually awesome in terms of their ability to do agile, etc. The biggest challenge they have is the contracting process, all of those legal things that get in the way. So who's the best? So there's been some really interesting work in the US government, 18F. I don't know if you're aware of 18F. So when Obamacare launched, everybody knows that it was a bit of a disaster, right? So they literally, the chief digital officer in the White House said, how do we fix this? And he called sort of like a call to arms, as it were. So people like Jez Humble, Martin Fowler, all these sort of like software rock stars joined this organization for a period of time called 18F. And what they did was they started really building out practices that would allow the US government to be more effective and more agile. I do recommend looking at their materials, really interesting stuff. And there are some examples now, even in the US government, of success. There's also some massive disasters still, which continue. In terms of actual governments that are doing well, hate to say it, but Scandinavia, the Netherlands, I know. And the reason why I think they're so successful is, one, they're smaller, which helps. It certainly constrains the opportunity for getting things wrong. The other thing is they tend to have, in the Netherlands, for instance, their culture tends to be very, you build a country below sea level and everybody's a little bit empirical. So they sort of naturally build that sort of way of thinking into stuff. It is a challenge, though. So, cut the suit to suit the cloth is a great phrase, but it also, I think, lends itself into this situation. Don't give up. You can still build amazing teams. Maybe some of the vehicles that those teams are being funded with, maybe some of the requirements lists, the success criteria are incredibly challenging. But I think that you're smart people, you can work out ways to get around it. And when you do, slowly that drives change into procurement offices and the like. But I would look at 18F as a blueprint for some of those approaches. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hard problem. Any other questions or comments? We got any online questions? Apparently some people are joining us online. No?
Hello?
Oh, hello.
Here's a question. I really enjoyed the way you had an historical point of view and evolution, that kind of stuff. Where do you see our job 20 years from now? What's the next step?
Where do I see your jobs in 20 years' time? I'll be honest, I've got no real idea. But what I'm hoping is that we're building these people-centric organizations. We're aligning them to customers with clear line of sight. We're providing a sustainable pace that's probably hybrid in terms of working practices, with a real investment in, I'm going to say Scrum Master, Agile coach, manager, whatever that is, but a more of a people-centric kind of, if you watch Star Trek, that Counselor Troy, you know, that person, a real investment in that. I also think we're going to have to make some decisions about who owns professional development. And I think we're currently in this world where, you know, do the individuals, are we really going to move to a sort of more of a gig kind of centric economy where you own your portfolio and you take it to organization after organization? Or are we going to really live in more of a world where organizations have an almost parental responsibility to develop human beings? The reason why, you know, health in the US, the reason why healthcare, education, those sort of things are funded by companies was historically Henry Ford started investing in his people primarily because the work was so horrible. You know, these people were brought in from the farms, they started working on production lines, and absenteeism and suicide and just depression and malaise was so key. So what they did was started building things around it to make it more valuable. We're going to move, I'm hoping, away from that kind of mentality. So we're going to be moving to something very different. I'm excited to see organizations wrestle with how to become more people-centric. I'm super excited with the investment in approaches like ICF professional coaching and these ways of making us more mindful about how we show up. I love the fact that we now have discussions about the stances of, say, a Scrum Master. Are we facilitating? Are we teaching? Are we mentoring? Are we coaching? What does that mean in terms of engagement? I think we're all going to get better at that. And if we do, then I think the whole world is going to be a better place. Work is the place where we meet people we wouldn't normally meet. Work is the place where we solve problems that we don't normally have the ability to solve. Imagine if we do that in a people-centric way. I hope my kids get the opportunity to work in that way, because I think that not only will it make them better human beings, but then the world will be a better place. So that's what I hope for. And I think we're running out of time. And I wouldn't want to keep you from all your awesome sessions. Have a fantastic day. Enjoy it. If you can do one thing, meet somebody you don't know and have a little chat. You know, talk about the hockey or whatever you want, and then maybe talk a little bit about the Agile, and build a relationship that maybe you continue after today. If you can do that one thing, I think it will be a great day and an 8 hours well spent. Thank you. Merci. Au revoir.
Hey. Dave West, ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause again. Thanks, Dave, for sharing with us your passion about agility and the future of it. Alors, cette keynote ouvre officiellement l'Agile Tour 2022. Avant de vous lever, attendez juste une petite seconde, s'il vous plaît. Je vais juste vous donner quelques consignes. Les 2 étages d'Expo-Cité vous sont désormais ouverts. Vous pourrez donc assister aux conférences affichées sur les écrans. Pour les participants qui nous suivent en ligne, vous pouvez rester live avec nous dans cette salle ou suivre les autres conférences qui vous seront présentées avec un léger différé. Donc là, c'est l'heure de la pause, histoire de garder cette salle propre et d'aider le travail de nos bénévoles et de l'équipe d'entretien d'Expo-Cité. Je vous demanderai de ramasser tous vos déchets, s'il vous plaît, au fur et à mesure et les disposer derrière dans les poubelles qui sont prévues à cette fin. On poursuit à 10 heures pile, donc dans 10 minutes. Je vous attends pour la suite de cette journée avec notre 2e conférence. Bonne pause, à tout à l'heure.